Hey guys, so one of the questions that I get asked most often is how do we make Assetto Corsa Competizione look so good in our racing videos? Now, those of you who have seen our rig tour videos would know that we're not running a conventional setup here by any means. We're running triple 65-inch 4K monitors, and we actually record the racing videos with this bicycle helmet, which has a GoPro 10 strapped to it. So I have that sitting on my head, and that is what records the footage. So obviously with quite a complex setup, there's a lot of additional steps between what we actually have coming out of the game on the monitors in front of me and what you guys see in the end result on YouTube. We've essentially got three separate sets of settings there which influence what you guys see. So the game settings, the camera settings, and then of course the editing settings of profiles that we use in Adobe Premiere. Now I wanted to make this video as valuable to as many people as possible, and obviously not everybody has a setup like we do here. So today's focus is going to be purely on optimizing the graphics inside ACC to get what you're seeing with your own eyes on the screens as good as possible. So let's jump right in. Okay, so let's run through everything that we have here in terms of options. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all thing. It's going to depend on the resolution that you're running, whether or not you're running triple screens, and of course, your hardware and your PC as well. So what I'm going to try and do is give you a good understanding of basically what kind of settings influence what in terms of the visual clarity and performance, and that'll give you a good picture of how you can best optimize for your particular setup. Now, it is going to be a bit of trial and error here, of course, but hopefully this will get you on your way. So first of all, full screen, always try to enable that wherever possible. Sometimes you may need to go into windowed mode for certain overlay software, but generally I find frame rates are a little bit better when you are running in full screen, so try to enable that where possible. Now resolution, obviously this is going to depend on your monitors, whether or not you have triples or not. One of the things you may notice when you go through the resolution settings here is that the maximum selectable resolution, and again, it will depend on the monitors that you got selected, but it may well be lower than the actual native resolution of your particular panels. In my case, I've actually got 11,520 pixels wide, so 3 4K monitors and then 2160 or 4K resolution vertically, but we can't actually select that resolution inside the game. So for the best visual fidelity, you do want to be running your panels at their native resolution. So what you can do to work around this issue if you have it is bring up your documents / Assetto Corsa Competizione / config folder and find in there a JSON file called menu settings.json. And I like to use an app called Notepad++ because it gives us line numbers. But if you don't have that, you can just open it with Notepad. If you open it with Notepad++ and then scroll all the way down to line 2799 and 2800, you'll see a resolution setting there for X and Y axes. So what you can do is close Assetto Corsa Competizione, set the resolution that you want in here, and then open the game up and it will automatically go to that resolution. Now, unfortunately, one of the downsides to that is that if you make any other changes in here and save them, then it overrides that file again. So you'll need to exit out, set that resolution manually again, and then come back in and you'll be good to go. So it's a little bit of a pain, and I'm not sure why that bug hasn't been fixed over the years. I don't know how many people it impacts, but obviously at these high resolutions that we're running here, it is a bit of a problem. Now, VSync or vertical synchronization, I have that disabled because my monitors are G-Sync. So what happens there is the refresh rate of the monitors actually scale up and down relative to the frame rate which is being inputted, so I don't need VSync. If you disable VSync, you typically will get slightly higher frame rates, sometimes significantly higher frame rates, but at the cost of some visual tearing and juddering and skipping and things like that. So it's going to be, again, dependent on what kind of monitors you're running. If you do have G-Sync or FreeSync monitors, you can generally get away with leaving VSync disabled. If you are finding you get tearing and artifacts going on, then leave this enabled and you're just going to have to take the performance hit. Obviously, it's a balance between getting the best visual fidelity, but obviously not only having the game running at a high enough frame rate, but a stable enough frame rate to be able to see exactly what's going on and drive comfortably. So frame rate limit, I will generally set that to, I don't know why that's changed actually, I'll generally set that to 144, which is the refresh rate of my monitors. What that's essentially doing is telling the game that you don't want to output any additional frames over the top of what your native refresh rate is of your panel. So 144 refresh rate, you would set your frame rate limit to 144. So menu frame rate limiter, I leave that enabled, obviously not going to impact the game performance. Triple screen, pretty self-explanatory there. If you're running triples, you're going to obviously want to have this enabled. HDR output, again, this does give a bit of a performance hit in some cases, so I like to leave this disabled. Because we're using cameras to film the footage in our particular case, this is just not something that's useful for me, but obviously HDR enabled is going to give you slightly more vibrant color if you wish to see that. And we'll talk about color a little bit later on in the video as well, because I think that's one area where you can really improve the realism of what you're seeing without any performance hit. So we'll look at that a little later on. Moving on now down to our basic settings. Resolution scale, you can see at the moment that is grayed out because we have DLSS enabled. So what resolution scaling will do is allow the game to actually output at the selected resolution here, but scale the actual rendering of the elements on the screen down or up. So if you increase it over 100%, it can give you a little bit more visual fidelity, but obviously at the cost of frame rate. If you underscale it, then you're going to get a boost in performance, but obviously the visual fidelity is going to drop off. But we're going to run DLSS, and we'll talk about that in just a minute as well. View distance, you want to set this as high as you can get away with. That's going to avoid things popping up in front of you like trees or barriers, other cars, for example. And again, this is a trade-off. At the moment, I've got this set to high. You can set it to epic, but I just found that I was seeing everything that I needed to see on the majority of tracks with the high setting, and setting it to epic did give me a pretty significant performance hit there. So that was a trade-off that I was willing to make. You may be able to get away with running that at epic on your particular system though. Shadows. Now, shadows are where things get really funny with ACC, because you'll notice if you run your shadows turned down, then you start to get this effect where the cars actually look like they're floating, or like they're hovercrafts sitting slightly above the track surface. So I always try to run my shadows as high as I can possibly get away with. Unfortunately, on my particular system, again with the resolution that we're running here, not able to get away with epic, but I would definitely recommend, if you can, try to get these settings as high as you can and make some sacrifices in some other areas to find the right balance in performance versus visual fidelity. So I'm going to leave that on high for now. Shadow distance as well. You don't want to have shadows popping up. It's the same kind of principle there as view distance. You want to try and have that set as high as you can get away with. Contact shadows, I leave that enabled. That just helps to bring out a little bit more detail. And then scrolling down here, you can see all the anti-alias settings are grayed out because we're running DLSS, or deep learning super sampling. So deep learning super sampling essentially allows the game to intelligently scale the resolution, and that's a really great way of boosting your frames per second without the visual hit in quality that you get with tweaking other settings. So again, it is going to be a balance here. The balance that I found works well is trying to have these guys set as high as we can get away with without dropping the frame rate too low, but then trying to have this as high as possible too. So the compromise I ended up with was quality set to performance and then sharpness set to 62%. So that means that it's able to scale the resolution down to 62% of native in those areas where it doesn't feel important. So DLSS is only going to work on NVIDIA graphics cards, whereas FSR achieves a similar thing but works with AMD and NVIDIA cards. And you'll see here that if you switch on FSR, it's going to disable DLSS because we can't have them both running at once, and vice versa. If you enable DLSS, it's going to switch off FSR. So effects, I like to have that set at epic simply because that does give a lot more, I guess, definition in things like smoke and, you know, all those effects which add to that level of realism. So that's another one which I prioritize. Post-processing, this is an area that you can definitely sacrifice a little bit. I find it doesn't have the same level of visual impact that a lot of the other settings do, but it does have quite a detrimental impact on performance if you run it too high. So I like to run that on high. I can get away with it. If I drop it down to medium, it boosts my frames by about 10 to 15 frames per second, but I'm still able to maintain an acceptable frame rate with that set to high. So that's what I do. Foliage and texture, again, we want to run these as high as we can possibly get away with whilst maintaining an acceptable frame rate. For me, that was high and epic, but obviously, again, that will depend on your particular setup. Now, mirror quality. This is an area which has a really big impact on the, I guess, immersion of the game. So I leave this set to epic. It does have quite a large impact on performance, but it's one of the areas where I don't want to sacrifice as much. You'll find that if you don't have mirror quality on epic, then a lot of the lighting and smoke effects just disappear entirely, and it pulls a lot away from the overall experience of the game. So I try to have these set as high as possible. Again, mirror view distance, have that as high as possible too, so we don't have things popping in and disappearing in our mirrors. Again, pulls away from the immersion. Mirror frame rate limit, I find 60 frames per second is absolutely fine. Cranking it higher than that, again, does have quite a large performance hit, so I'm comfortable running there. Mirror resolution, again, we want to run this as high as possible so it doesn't look all grainy and pixelated. And then opponent visibility, this just determines how many other cars are visible on the track. And again, we want to try and avoid cars popping in and disappearing, so I leave this set to all. This does have a very large impact on performance though, so if you're really struggling to get the performance that you want, then you can turn this down to compensate for that. So scrolling down, we're going to skip over virtual reality for now. I actually have another video where I talked about optimizing VR performance, so I'll link that down in the description for you guys. Going down to advanced now, pretty much the same principles which we've already discussed applying here. So again, it's a balance between trying to get these settings as high as possible, sacrificing the areas which aren't necessarily important to you and your experience and how you like to drive the game, whilst maintaining as high a level of frame rate as possible. So materials quality, that is quite an important one. Bloom quality, this affects light diffusion. So I find that if we turn bloom down below high, often we get some weird flashes, particularly at nighttime driving when you've got a lot of lighting effects going on. You get all sorts of weird visual artifacts going on if you run this lower than high. So definitely one I would recommend prioritizing here. Volumetric fog. Now this is one that actually traps a lot of people because you'll have a really great frame rate and then somebody will spin in front of you, you get a bunch of smoke or dust, and suddenly the frame rate just absolutely plummets and starts chopping around. So again, you want to try and maintain a balance here. For me, I was able to run this at high, but it's just going to depend on your system. Foliage level of detail and car level of detail, pretty self-explanatory there. Again, the same principles are going to apply. Just try to have them as high as you can whilst maintaining a nice frame rate. Hierarchical level of detail, definitely want to enable this one. That's going to give you a slight boost in performance without much visual hit whatsoever. So definitely one to keep enabled. An advanced sharpening filter. This is something that can enhance graphics far away in the distance. But again, the performance hit is too big for me and I just didn't really find it was worth that. So I leave that one disabled. So that is pretty much everything as it pertains to frame rate. So one thing I just want to mention here as well is, I guess, best principles when it comes to frame rate. Now, opinions here are going to vary quite greatly, and again, it will depend on the refresh rate of your panels. For most people, you're going to want to try and maintain a frame rate as close to as possible to the native refresh rate of your panel. So if you've got 144 Hertz monitors, for example, you're going to want to try and maintain frame rates at around about 144 frames per second for the best experience. Now, I find, again, with running such a massive resolution here, I do have to make some sacrifices. I'm able to get an average of between about 70 and 80 frames per second, whilst maintaining a level of visual fidelity that I'm happy with and still looks good in the videos. But again, ultimately there, it's just going to boil down to what's going to look best for you. So then we scroll down to image customization. This is where we tweak quite a lot just to try and get things to look as natural as possible. So one of the things I find with Assetto Corsa Competizione in particular, and it's to do with the game engine that they're running here, it does tend to look quite cartoony. The colors are a little bit oversaturated and it kind of has that video game look to it. So there are a couple of things that we can do here just to make things look a little bit more lifelike, I suppose. And again, there is a bit of post-processing that we do in Adobe Premiere as well, just to make things look even more natural in terms of what the camera is recording. But in terms of what you're seeing on the screens, these are the settings that I would recommend. And again, it will depend on your monitors, the settings that you have there as well. We've got our settings on the monitors set as neutral as possible, so there's no post-processing going on the screens. I generally recommend that approach simply because any sort of post-processing that you're doing on the screens themselves can introduce some input lag, and that is obviously not something that we want. So motion blur, I leave that disabled. I just find that that looks quite cartoony. I just don't like it, but it is a subjective thing. Saturation, this is probably the main one. So I crank that down to 90%. It just takes that edge off and makes it look a lot less cartoony. White balance, I run at neutral, but that is just purely going to depend on the color reproduction of your monitors. And then image contrast, exposure gain, and tone mapping. Again, it's just going to be down to fine tuning these to suit your particular setup. There's not really a right or wrong setting. And that is everything. So I really hope that this helps give you the confidence to do some tweaking and get the best performance out of your system. It is going to be very much a trial and error thing. Everybody's system is different. Everybody's screens are different. And there certainly isn't a one size fits all. But hopefully you now have the confidence to jump in and set things up for yourself. Let me know how you go in the comments as well. Has this helped you out to get a boost in performance? And if you have any other recommended settings or anything that you have found is particularly useful or beneficial, let us know down in the comments below. It's always valuable to get everybody's input. This is just what's worked well for me in my experience, and hopefully it helps you guys out too. So leave a big fat thumbs up if it has helped you out. Make sure you sub to the channel as well so you don't miss future videos. And I will see you guys again very soon. Bye.